Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we have fun discussing the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 82nd edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 413th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, June 28th, 2018. I am your host, Jared Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Martin takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment comes in the form of a quote from a former Hoosier who may not have grown up in Indiana, but who is as beloved here in the Hoosier state as any born and bred Hoosier could be. And you probably already know who I'm talking about. Yes, the NBA's 2018 Most Improved Player, Victor Oladipo. Here's the quote as relayed by Pacers reporter Jay Michael in a tweet on Wednesday. Oladipo on what he tells potential free agents, quote, "If they want to come to something bigger than themselves, come to Indiana," unquote. And that right there tells you all you need to know about why Victor Oladipo is as beloved in this state as he is, and why he's able to be both an effervescent superstar and a quintessential teammate, which is not something most athletes can pull off. Victor may be from Maryland, but who cares? He could be from Mars. What matters is that in his mind, in his heart, and in his soul, he understands the deeper meaning of basketball in Indiana. And so while I am all in on Archie Miller's inside-out strategy and think that targeting in-state stars like Romeo Langford and Trace Jackson Davis is a no-brainer, while also targeting solid four-year players like Robert Finney and Brandon Newman is smart too, what will always be more important than the state a player comes from is the state of mind he arrives in. Archie's ability to get this assessment correct on a consistent basis is what will ultimately determine his long-term success or failure at IU. Jeremy Hollowell, Hunter Mascara-Perea, and others came from Indiana, but weren't about Indiana. Victor Oladipo, Juwan Morgan, Robert Johnson, and countless others didn't come from Indiana, but they were Indiana. And now, if Archie Miller ever feels like his players have forgotten what it means to play for Indiana and what this beautiful sport means in this state, all he has to do is point to the simple words of the world's biggest current Indiana basketball superstar. If they want to come to something bigger than themselves, come to Indiana.
I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that.
All right, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, he is back after a 2-week hiatus, one of the world's most renowned bracketologists, the president emeritus of the Robert Johnson Fan Club, and now the biggest fan of the Atlanta Hawks Summer League team. He is a newly bearded Andy Bottoms. Andy, what is your Bottoms line from the past week in Indiana basketball?
I mean, I am excited to get my Atlanta Hawks Summer League gear, that I'm sure will be arriving in the mail shortly. But certainly wish Robert the best as he goes through that. We talked a lot about the social media stuff, and this actually came from social media, although it isn't necessarily, something that the school put out, but it was from Cliff Marshall this morning. It was about Al Durham. Al Durham could have slept in this morning, but he was up before sunrise in the gym by himself working on his game. He still has a lift class and then another skill workout this afternoon. And it's basically a shot of Al shooting jumpers and working on his game. And I think it's easy for us to sit here in the off season and kind of wish it away and say, I wish that it was Hoosier Hysteria. I wish that games were starting and things like that. And I think while there's parts of me that are right there, with everybody who thinks that, there's also a part that, you don't want to kind of wish away the times of the offseason that these guys can really improve. And you talked about Oladipo and the leaps that he made in the offseason by putting that work in. And a guy like Al, who's putting that work in this offseason, you kind of forget in your own, selfishness or whatever you want to call it to get the season here. It's easy to forget how much these guys can improve and how much they can grow over the time in the offseason. I thought that was a good, obviously exciting for people to be able to get a, small glimpse into what Al's doing in the offseason, but kind of a reminder in some ways that as exciting as the season will be and should be when it gets here, there's a lot of time between now and then, and there's a lot of growth that you can see from these guys. And as we look at guys from one year to the next, these are important months for them. even though they kind of feel like throwaway months as a fan where you just want to get rid of them and move on with the calendar. So, just something to think about as we, move through the offseason and the dog days of summer, as it were, just what these guys are doing. And there's a lot of good coverage from the IU Twitter account and just other things that are giving you an idea of what they're putting in, the work they're putting in to get ready for the season.
And to my right, it is not Ryan Phillips, writer for The Big Lead and host of The Hangover, with his usual rant. He was all set to join us, but then he had an unfortunate misadventure on his way to our Assembly Call remote studio in San Diego.
I was stone friggin' sober and lost my phone in an Uber.
On the bright side, at least we can all learn an important lesson from what happened to Ryan.
And the moral of the story is never leave your friggin' phone in an Uber like an idiot.
Yeah, well said, Ryan. Instead, we are once again joined by the founder of Delphi Bracketology, Andy's new nemesis in the Bracket Matrix rankings, the host of Talking Hoosier Baseball, and assistant coach at Western High School, and a man who we learned last week is a master in the art of subtle trash talk.
Now I know why Ryan's new show is called what it is, because he kind of drafted like that, I think. But anyway.
Ouch.
He is the coach, Brian Tonsoni. Coach, it is Tonsoni time. What's on your mind?
I'm going to say the word competition. And we talked, both of you in your opening statements talked about an improvement in an NBA player, Oladipo, and then the improvement of Al Durham working on his own. All of the programs across America have their workouts, their 4 hours, their lifts. But it's what is done outside of those lifts that really make players better and make programs better. And what really makes programs better is if everyone is improving at such a high rate that there is great competition for playing time. And that is something that I'm really looking forward to. And as Andy said, and you can tell you guys are starting to talk like great coaches, and Andy's been a great coach at his level. You don't want to wish away these moments. And it's really nice to see on social media the variety of players that are doing the required workouts, but also we know that they're in on their own. And when you have talented players who want to come in on their own, that just makes the program better. We saw, I think it's Forster dunking and said on social media, I think we saw Fitzner today, if that was my interpretation of him in a social media. There's going to be a lot of players in the program now that are going to be somewhat close to each other, and it's going to be competitive, and then it's going to raise all levels of play. And so that's what's exciting to me right now as we see former Hoosiers improve, and as you said, Jared, and a current Hoosier improving through social media. And let's hope that 13, 14, and even the walk-ons are pushing each other to get better and get this Indiana program towards its sixth banner.
Well said, Coach. All right, here is what we are going to talk about this week. We're going to give a quick recap of the results from last week's 3-team, 7-man IU basketball player draft, and then Andy will present the team that he created with the leftovers. He took the challenge, and you'll hear what team he came up with. In segments 2 and 3, then, we're taking our deep dive on Zach McRoberts, what his role is likely to be at the start of the season, and what he'll need to improve on to keep his minutes on the more talented roster that Coach just alluded to. And then in segment number 4, we will answer your questions. Got a few really good ones submitted, so we look forward to answering those. All of that coming here on Assembly Call Radio. Now, real quick, before we get to all of that stuff, I want to tell you about 2 great ways to shop online for tickets and for IU gear that also help us out at the same time. So remember these 2 URLs, iutickets.shop and iustore.shop. Bookmark them, memorize them, whatever helps, because when you use them to buy IU tickets or gear, we actually get paid a commission for referring you. So iutickets.shop will take you right to SeatGeek, where you can browse the latest listings on IU basketball tickets and always find the best prices and deals. You can also search for IU football tickets or any other sports tickets, concert tickets, anything. As long as you use iutickets.shop as the URL to get there, we will get credit. And as a bonus, use the promo code ASSEMBLY to get $20 back after your first purchase. iustore.shop will take you to the official IU online store, where they have gear for everyone and everything, from shirts, hats, and jerseys for adults and kids to tailgate gear, office gear, basically you name it, and they've got it. We really, really appreciate you bookmarking and using those URLs, because the commissions do add up and they help us cover the growing costs of running the show.
whatever is just so friggin' confusing.
Yeah, but it's really not, Ryan. Whenever you're going to shop for IU tickets or IU gear, just use the URLs iutickets.shop and iustore.shop. Again, that's iutickets.shop and iustore.shop.
Thank you.
Alrighty, you are listening to Assembly Call Radio. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and the coach Brian Tonsoni. So, Coach, last week you were on with us with Ryan. We did a 3-man draft. We each drafted a 7-player team from the last 12 years of Indiana basketball. If you didn't, get to hear the teams, go back and listen to last week's episode. I was a little worried about how that episode was going to play, but we got a lot of positive comments on it. People seemed to enjoy it, and we certainly had fun with it. But we said that we would let the audience decide who drafted the best team. And I have to say that based on the audience response that we got in the YouTube chat, on Twitter, Coach Tonsoni's team was the clear winner. The combo of Eric Gordon and Romeo Langford with Cody Zeller anchoring the post really was too much for me and Ryan to overcome. I don't even know if anybody even really thought about our rosters. Once they heard that you had those 3 guys together, it was pretty much over. And that made this little bit of Tonsoni trash talk quite prophetic, I will say.
I commend you guys for trying, and I'm glad you had me on for this segment. So if you need some further instruction, I'll be glad, send you some emails.
So would you like to take a quick victory lap here, Coach? Because you were clearly the winner based on the audience vote.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all the fans in the chat room and all the listeners that voted for me. Without you, I wouldn't have been on top. And it's really for you guys that I showed up last Thursday and made the pick. So without the fan base, I wouldn't be able to draft. But, it's also a little bit easy to go against you and Ryan. So I don't know that it was the toughest competition. So
the trash talk.
No,
it just keeps flowing.
Yeah, I have to continue a little bit. No, I appreciate it.
I like how he just slips it in like normal conversation, like he's just talking and then it just
very subtle
slides in. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
So it was. I think honestly, the third pick was nice because it allowed to see where everyone else was going, and then when you have that first snake back around and you get 3 and 4, that kind of, I think the third pick was fortunate. That's when Ryan offered the first pick. I declined because I thought that position, the third and fourth, you get 2 of the top 4 players, and then Zeller and Gordon. And then from there on out, you always had 2 picks and can kind of see what's left and pick. So I think the position had a lot to do with it as well.
I would have to say coming in second by a razor thin margin was Ryan's team, but we don't need to linger on that anymore. Andy, let's go to the leftovers. You unfortunately weren't able to be there with us, but you did take on the challenge of drafting a team of the leftovers, all the other guys from the last 12 years that didn't get picked. Let's quickly run down your roster.
Okay. Well, I will say that I enjoyed listening to the podcast. We were driving back from vacation, so it helped us get through West Virginia. So it was much appreciated, and my wife and I both got some good laughs out of Coach's trash talk. So, and I think we both landed on his. We would have voted for his team as well. So congrats to him and from there. So obviously with the leftovers, I took as many liberties as I possibly could in terms of what you guys talked about was. You have to take their last year of production. I opted to take their best year because otherwise I'm not really sure. In some cases, I picked a specific game of what version of a player I wanted. I also said that I was able to get extra players as a result of that. So we'll get into that. So quickly, the team that I had a couple of Kelvin Sampson All-Stars at the beginning. I had Armand Bassett and Jordan Crawford. I took those couple guys. Verdell Jones, who averaged almost 15 points a game in the 2009-2010 season. Tom Pritchard, author of the Pritch Slap, and did score nearly 10 points a game in I believe it was his freshman year. Maurice Creek. So I choose, his stats from his freshman season, most notably the Kentucky game. So if I get the best version of him, that's helpful. Along similar lines, Deron Davis, because I realized that at that point, I'm going to definitely be playing a more traditional post man in my lineup, as you see here. So maybe a 4-out 1-in type scenario. So I took Deron. His stats were best from last year. Stan Robinson I took because anybody who's followed the show for a long period of time knows that Jared and I were, staunch supporters of Stan Robinson. I know that he can defend centers. And I specifically said that I wanted the version of him that scored 21 points against Oregon in the NCAA tournament a couple years ago.
That was with Rhode Island. That doesn't count.
Yeah, it was always there. You and I always knew. Don't deny it. And then the others, I said I got extra players. So I took Justin Smith off of this year's team, And last year, I think, a lot of growth there. And then Tijon, I mean, I'm going to probably end up, based on, playing Tom Pritchard and Deron Davis, I'm going to need additional fouls inside. And I don't know of anyone better suited to be able to provide those fouls than Tijon. So I also opted to take Derek Elston as my player coach. He is on staff. So I chose not to go with Kelvin Sampson, although many of the rules he's broken are now, legal. So perhaps that would be okay. But again, I figured I could use all the help I could get. So if I could find a way to get a player coach, that was the route that I went. I think I would probably be in a difficult spot against any of your teams, but I felt like, choosing from what was left when you sent me the spreadsheet that you guys used to draft, I think there were approximately 2 players left on it that didn't get drafted. So I had to, kind of dig through and make my own rules, but I'll live with the guys I got and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So let us know on Twitter what you think of Andy's team. Again, if you missed that episode, it's episode 412 where we did the draft. You can go to the show notes. You can see all of our rosters. We really had a lot of fun with that. So thank you for all of your votes, all of your feedback. That was a lot of fun to do. Okay, coming up, we got to get to this. Let's continue our offseason player-by-player analysis. It is time to talk Zach McRoberts. He has played a bigger role than expected each of the last couple of seasons. Will it happen again this year as a senior, even with a roster more stacked with talent? We are going to discuss that and break it down next. Stick with us. Alrighty. And that is segment number 1. Hello to everybody watching live. Good to see you all here. I know. Oh, yeah. Brian Toohey mentioned Matt Roth. What about his 9 threes? And while you're at it,
I had him on the list as I was doing it, but I felt like I'm not sure how many guys I wrote down were all guards. So at some point I just need to start looking for big guys.
And why didn't you just take Devin Davis, like some of his bigger games for Houston this year, based on your Stan Robinson?
I did think about it. Emmett Holt was another one that I thought about. If you could take like a version of someone who was not at IU, but
he had a couple of good games for Indiana late in his freshman year.
Yeah, he showed some promise for sure. So yeah, there was an interesting cast of characters left to pick from as I went through the list.
Yeah,
a few names I'd rather forget too, quite honestly. But
a lot of credit has to go to Verdell and Tom on your team. When Verdell was playing, he got a lot of negative comments, and I don't know that while he was playing, he was my favorite player at the time. But to come in when they did and to play for 4 years and to, get this thing started in the right direction, kudos to them. I think those are 2 picks of yours, Andy, that I really, really like for maybe not even basketball reasons, but just character. And they've stayed pro Indiana after they've left. Just quality guys.
History has shined well on Verdell Jones, I think.
Yes.
I think he has been very respected and appreciated, more so since he graduated even than when he was playing.
I agree.
He was one I remember. That was, I think, one of the for his first couple seasons that he played was when I stumbled upon Crimson Cast with Scott and Galen, and I just remember them kind of talking about him in a way that was essentially the gist of it was like, it's easy to be upset with this guy as you watch the games, but think about what does it say about the coaching staff that's putting him in the position to be asked to shoulder as much of a load as he was and to do the things that he was being asked to do, which really may have been above at least what at the time he should have been doing, was capable of, whatever you want to say. And that was always one of the things that like I kind of come back to with him was, I think once I started to put things in that perspective, it probably changed my view a lot on him, just in terms of, all the things that he was being asked to do for that team with that little. And it was like, yeah, you could argue this guy shouldn't shoot that much, but that's what he was being asked to do, and to try to score and to do some things like that. So yeah, in those couple seasons where they could hardly win any Big Ten games, he typically was a big reason why, if they did get a win in those.
Yeah.
I think
and then to not be able to play in the
one that he played really well in.
Oh, I know what you're going to say, Coach.
Not to be able to play in the NCAA tournament after all those times of rebuilding was, another mark for me to say thank you. I think I went through the same process as Andy with him, and you just don't like to see that that gave 4 great years an opportunity to go to the NCAA again and have that unfortunate injury.
Yep. All right, are we ready to hop in and do this. Also, there was a comment here in the YouTube chat from Brian. He said, "Wow, 9 on the dot because we started on time." Just gonna ask you to pay attention to the 3 people who are here and the person who's not here in terms of why we were able to start on time.
Yeah, connect the dots on your own. It's really up to you. No one's here to cast aspersions on others, but
I mean, I'll just like.
But if you want to reach your own conclusion as an audience, far be it from us to stand in your way.
Right. Brian says, "We know." Okay, let's do this. I think I'm done laughing now. Okay, you guys ready? All right, here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. If you ever have to miss all or part of an episode of Assembly Call Radio, there are 2 great ways to catch up. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for Assembly Call and you will find us. Or you can watch our live video broadcasts on Thursday nights and participate in the live chat on YouTube. And when you watch on YouTube, whether you watch us live or watch the archive version, for better or worse, you get all of the between segment banner that doesn't make it into the radio or podcast edit, like the great conversation that we just had reminiscing about Verdell Jones. And also on a recent episode, that included Ryan making this really strange comment about Andy.
I wish I had his upper body, man. He's ripped.
I don't know if that's accurate, but all right.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/assemblycall. All right, I am Jared Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and the coach Brian Tonsoni. And every offseason, we go through each returning player and really dive deep, talk about their strengths, talk about their weaknesses, talk about what they need to improve on. This week, we're talking about Zach McRoberts. And guys, to start, I just want to give a quick reset on his career because it's really been a remarkable career so far for Zach McRoberts. We know that he had a brother who was a 5-star recruit and an 11-year NBA veteran, so he's got it in his family. At the high school level, he was very successful. He won back-to-back state titles as a sophomore and a junior, was an Indiana All-Star at Carmel, and then his freshman year of 2015 played at the University of Vermont and was solid. He played 40% of the minutes, was second on the team in offensive rating, and Vermont is a good program. Like, they have been a KenPom top 76 team 3 out of the last 5 years. And just for comparison's sake, last year, Indiana was number 71, Vermont was number 76. And for a lot of the season, Vermont was actually ahead of Indiana. And it was easy to make the joke that Zach had taken a step back by transferring and playing for Indiana instead of Vermont. But you probably know the story by now. He attends Indiana in 2016, doesn't play basketball, apparently got excited by Indiana's Big Ten title, decided to walk on in 2017, started the season really far down in the rotation, but ultimately ended up playing about 25% of the minutes and was, one guy playing defense on a team filled with guys that didn't, and there were clearly a lot of injuries on that team. And then last year in 2018, he starts the season far down in the rotation, but ends up playing almost 50% of the minutes. So he played 15 or fewer minutes in all of the first 10 games. Then he played 31 in the huge win over Notre Dame and had, probably the most memorable play of the season when he, made that pass to Juwan Morgan. And then he only played less than 20 minutes 3 times the rest of the season, was a starter, had the second best offensive rating on the team, albeit with very limited attempts, and we're going to talk about that. But he was the best 3-point shooter in terms of percentage at 39.4%, had a steal rate of 3.6% that was 37th in the country and first in the Big Ten. And so he really made his imprint on last year's team. And now, I've seen some people predicting a slide down the bench, a slide down the rotation for Zach because of all the talent that is coming in, Andy. But, based on the role that he filled last year, the fact that this is still an inexperienced group and a group that's going to be driven by defense because Archie Miller is their coach. And just based on some of the comments Archie has made, at this point, I'm going to be surprised if he's not starting come the first game. And we'll talk about some things he needs to do to, kind of entrench himself in that spot. But are you kind of feeling the same way that people talking about him getting fewer minutes already are a little bit premature with that talk?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I was listening to a podcast on the break earlier in the week, and you and Alex were talking a little bit about, who are the guys that you think are, if you said there's going to be an 8 or 9 man rotation, who are the guys that you think are, locks to be a part of that? And I think you guys mentioned him. I don't think he landed in the group of of actual locks. I think you really just had Juwan, Romeo, Devontae, and Justin Smith. I mean, I would have certainly argued that he'd be on there. What I see when you kind of go back through that synopsis is you had in the last 2 years, 2 very different coaches who ultimately valued different things. I think we'd all agree. Couldn't really, probably started the season with a thought of, look, this guy's a walk-on. I'm unlikely to, need this guy, use this guy. And they eventually both got to a point where like he had to be a key part of the rotation. Again, it's one thing if that's a guy like Archie, but I mean, Crean saw the same thing where, on that team, he was still playing a heck of a lot more than what you thought he would have, I think, just because of the intangible things that he brought to the table. And ultimately these guys are in it to win basketball games. So you got 2 guys with different philosophies that both walked away with the impression that this guy gives me a better chance to win. And I'm not sure that a whole bunch of new guys coming in change that a whole lot. And I think if anything, some of the additional offensive firepower that's there with a guy like Romeo actually helps McRoberts stay in because it's somebody who can help to offset what his deficiencies would be.
Coach, obviously a guy like Zach McRoberts, like Andy just said, 2 different coaches who value different things. They both saw reason to give Zach more minutes than anybody would have thought. Do you see any reason that would change as his senior year approaches?
The only reason that changes is if the talented players come in, match the level of intensity and match the level of play that McRoberts has. And that is I think, a big reach for freshmen coming in for their first year. I think sometimes players like McRoberts benefit from rosters that were missing some of those intangibles and that basketball IQ. And so he rises up. And that could be why he had more minutes in the last 2 or 3 years. And I'll go back to the opening statement I made. It's about competition. Zach McRoberts has set a high mark, and the competition has to rise to that mark in order to take his spot. And I think that the things that he does well are going to have to be matched by players who might be physically more gifted. And if they're not matched, then you'll see continuing minutes for Zach McRoberts. As a coach, though, you do look at putting your best team out there. And each year you start over to some extent. What you did in the past is not necessarily a guarantee that you just slide into position because what you've done in the past. You have got to maintain that and improve that and then beat out the competition. And I think there's more competition. So if we see a slide in his minutes, that's probably a positive for the program because the other players are rising to or above what we already consider to be really great level of play by McRoberts.
You're listening to Assembly Call Radio. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and the coach Brian Tonsoni doing our offseason breakdown of Zach McRoberts. I was thinking about this today. I mean, we often talk about Zach McRoberts and it's like, oh, he hustles. He's this underdog guy, and he is a lot of those things. And we're going to talk when we talk about his strengths and weaknesses about what he needs to do offensively to be more of a threat. But, I wonder if we're doing him a disservice because you look at guys in the NBA and they always talk about the 3-and-D guy, the person who plays really good defense and then can space the floor because they make 3-pointers. And I look at Zach as, a quintessential at the college level, a D-and-3 guy right now, because obviously his value is more on defense. He gets the steals. You can put him on a wide variety of guys. He's outstanding as a defender, both, on the ball and as a help defender. And he can knock down the open 3, again, if he can just start taking more of those with more confidence. But coach, do you kind of feel like we're underselling what he actually brings to the basketball court by just kind of chalking it up to, him being on the floor just because he plays hard?
Yes, because I think we look at a lot of times outside the program at things like scoring ability and dunking and high one-handed rebounds and some of those skill things. But it's the little things. I will say this on offense. It's about angles. He cuts well. He spots up well. He spaces the offense well. He knows when to, we call it a dive. When there's a drive on the weak side, he dives to the opening and he gets to loose balls. He understands how to compete for loose balls. And on offense, he really moves the basketball with the one more pass. When it comes to him, he knows who's on the floor and who needs to get the basketball. Those are skills that sometimes aren't very popular. And that's what the coaches have seen in the last couple of years and have put him out there to do that. This is a very skilled, I think basketball IQ is a skill. Shooting, guarding, also skills. But the basketball IQ one sometimes is not looked upon as favorably, and that is his biggest strength, that he is a top-notch college player when it comes to doing all of those things right, and he makes teammates better. That is important. And so, yes, it's just not playing hard. It's doing all of the little things that make a defense and an offense click.
Andy, do you think it's something where, national pundits and maybe people who aren't, diehard IU fans who watch the team inside and out, every single game, do you think it's something that as they look at Indiana now at the preseason, they're trying to assess how good Indiana is going to be, and they see, Zach McRoberts still in the rotation, that's the kind of thing where they're like, and maybe they totally overlook him and just see all the freshmen coming in and don't even think he's going to play. But do you think that's the kind of thing that people look at as too much of a question mark than it should be, that you really have to be able to watch the games to truly understand?
I mean, I would say yes, if for no other reason than when you go and look at the, a lot of things that Brian mentioned, things that we've mentioned aren't things that if you just go back and look at a stat line and say, here's what this guy did, it's not going to blow you away. And I think it's going to be more of what you said, where it's, people will view him as a placeholder until something better came along and got there. And that he played last year out of necessity, potentially more than merit. And now you've got these guys coming in that are going to take that spot away. And I don't think Archie's going to be one to quickly relinquish that spot. And I don't think he's going to be one to quickly relinquish that spot. But I do think for those who don't, live and breathe this kind of thing, it'd be easy to say like, well, thank God they finally have a guy who can step in for this guy who couldn't average, 5 points a game or whatever it was. And, again, I think on last year's team, that was not problematic because he certainly helped them play well as they won, but it was, his kind of lack of statistical production was a detriment because there weren't enough other guys to really pick up the slack. I think where the influx of talent helps is now that he doesn't necessarily need to be more than what he was last year. And even though I think he could be, and he may end up being, more of a producer and may score a few more points, I don't know that that's as necessary this year as maybe as it was last year. And I think it, in some ways it could actually be a benefit to him where he can really settle in and not feel any pressure whatsoever to do more than what he's comfortable with, even though I think we'd all like to see him take more open shots that he has and things like that, because he's proven that he can make them. And I think that's important too. But it's one of those, you could kind of view it either way, but I think people who don't know enough about the program are certainly going to be more apt to say, let's slide this guy aside. Somebody else is going to take a spot.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And we should be careful. I mean, Zach McRoberts is not, Calvert Chaney. I mean, he obviously has his limitations as a player and is a role player. But I just, I've seen a few people who are, I think, discounting what he can be on this team, and not just that he's going to hold on to his spot by default, but that, I really think he's going to earn it. And as I said, maybe is underrated for a lot of the different things he can do that don't show up in the box score, but Coach, like you said, do contribute to winning basketball games. So coming up, we're going to continue our look at Zach McRoberts by diving into some of the numbers at Synergy and at KenPom to find out what Zach's greatest strengths were on offense and defense, and what specifically he needs to improve on to take the next step as a senior and to be more than a guy who just plays defense and occasionally scores, but that can really fit his role on this year's team. That is next. Stick with us. All right. 13 minutes and 16 seconds. Well done.
In theory, if you're recruiting 4-star and 5-star guys to Indiana, in theory, they should be better than Zach McRoberts. But Zach, it went to a D1. He's not a true walk-on in the sense of someone who wasn't recruited to play D1. He went to a smaller D1. But in theory, those players should be better. But the youth and the experience of McRoberts and some of the things that he's done does elevate him to a higher spot in my mind. And the other thing I think is that he could have decreased minutes and still have a major role simply because we have more talent and the rotation can be such that he's not playing as many minutes, but he's still playing the quality minutes whether it be a starter or off the bench as well, because we have a lot more guys we're going to try to maybe get in as well, even if we just settle 8 or 9.
Well, I think with him,
really
there's, Jared, you and Alex talked about this on Podcast on the Brink this week, was, this team does have a lot of, while everybody wants to be optimistic, this team has a lot of questions around it. And last year's team had a lot of questions around it. And one of the guys that you could point to and say, I know what I'm going to get from this guy night in and night out, was McRoberts. And there weren't too many guys that you kind of hang your hat on. You might say that's not enough, or I'd like to see more from somebody, but you knew what you were going to get from him. And he was reliable. And you knew the effort level you were going to get, a good defender. If you get, if you get 8 points, great. If you get 3 points, so be it. And I think there's value in that on a team that's still going to have a lot of question marks, maybe different question marks than you had a year ago. But if you roll him out there as a coach, you know what you're going to get out of him. And the potential, the ceiling for some of the guys on the bench, to Brian's point, is probably higher. But the range of outcomes with those guys is pretty wide. And I think it's, especially early on, while you're kind of feeling out what's going to happen with the team, I think he's going to play a lot. And whether it slides into more what Brian said, that it maybe becomes a, fewer minutes, but maybe more impactful, that could be. But I think in the early going, to me, you're going to want to be somewhat conservative and say, hey, look, I know what this guy's going to give me, and I'll intersperse the other guys. And if that balance shifts over the course of the season, then so be it.
Yep. Andy, that's a good point, because you look at what the freshmen did last year, up and down early, with Al playing well, and then he went into a down cycle, and Justin Smith the same thing. And though Justin Smith's a young guy that we think is going to be a little more consistent this year. So we've got the good freshmen coming in, and early on they're probably going to be inconsistent, and you have that guy in McRoberts that can level that off. That's a good point.
That was good stuff. Let's Andy, I'm going to open. I want you to talk about that, because that was a really good point about the consistency part. So before we dive into the numbers, let me kick it over to you for that, because that should go on the podcast and go on the radio show. That was good. All right, you guys ready for segment number 3?
Yep.
Okay. Let's do it. Okay. Welcome back. You are listening to the Assembly Call. So here is a little fun fact. We have over 5,700 now IU fans from around the globe who subscribe to our email newsletter.
There's a high-level operation going on out there.
And you can join too. It is easy. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. You will get our weekly 6-man Sunday news roundups, as well as our post-game analysis emails. Once the season begins, it is all free, and it will make you a smarter and more well-informed IU basketball fan. Again, go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 and join for free today.
Make no excuses.
I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and the coach, Brian Tonsoni, as Ryan Phillips has the week off. And we are doing our deep dive into Zach McRoberts, talking about what his role will be on this year's team. And we're about to look at some of the numbers and really, assess his strengths and weaknesses and what in particular he's got room to improve on. But Andy, when we were talking between segments, you made a really good point. As we start talking about strengths and weaknesses here, one of the biggest strengths that Zach possesses is consistency. Like, you just know he's going to play hard. You know what you're going to get. And even if there may be some things that would be lacking for him to be the perfect basketball player, he's not going to take guys off the dribble, except for that one glorious time against Michigan State, which was fantastic. He's not going to give you huge offensive outbursts, but as a coach, you do know what he's going to give you. And that in and of itself is a strength. And coach, you might even say that's a talent. How important is that, you think, Andy?
Well, we talked a little bit about, at various points of last season and really the last few seasons, it's kind of been a question of how many guys do you have that you know what you're going to get from them on a night in and night out basis. And I think over the course of last season, when Zach really worked his way into the rotation, he was a guy that you would point to and say, look, what you're going to get from him may not be spectacular on the stat sheet, but you knew what you were going to get from an effort, from a defense, and those kinds of things. And on a team that's pretty young and that still has a lot of questions, maybe different questions than were there a year ago, I don't think you can undersell the value to a coach of having a guy out there that is going to make the smart play to some of the basketball IQ stuff that coach was talking about earlier. I think there's a value in that, and maybe the balance of those minutes shifts over the course of the season, and he plays a little bit less, maybe fewer, more impactful minutes on down the line. But with a number of young guys who you're really trying to ease in, I think there's a certain comfort as a coach to being able to have a guy like that where you can allow those guys to ease in. And I think that's a luxury that some of these guys didn't have a year ago. And while this is probably not a veteran team by any means, I think being able to use some of the experience that you do have with a guy like Zach to really anchor things and be a steadying influence and a consistent producer will help the young guys along early on where they don't have to take on too much.
Yep. So, Coach, let's talk about some of Zach's strengths. And look, we know how good he is on defense, and I have a few numbers that I'll talk about here in a minute that further solidify that. But I want to start on the offensive end. And I think when we talk about a strength that we really hope that Zach can double down on, it's the shooting. He didn't have a lot of opportunities last year, but in 36 possessions spotting up, he produced 1.11 points per possession, which is actually in the 84th percentile. So that's really good. And he was good in catch and shoot situations. He was 11 for 28 overall, which is only a field goal percentage of 39.3%. But that's why a field goal percentage is not always the stat you want to look at. His effective field goal percentage was 58.9%. because most of those were 3-pointers, and that was in the 81st percentile. And I think, the one thing that's easy to assume about this year is you might think, well, Zach's going to get a lot more open looks because now he's got, Juwan Morgan's there and Romeo Langford's there and Devontae Green should be better. But I started thinking back to last year, and it's not like he wasn't getting open looks. He was just kind of scared to take them. I think, we referenced it before, kind of these hot potato pass outs where he would just get it and not even look at the basket. And so he should get some more opportunities because of the guys around him, but it's not going to make a difference if he's not more confident and able to step up. And I really think when you look at what he can provide offensively, in addition to the opportunistic offensive rebounding and the tap outs and the cutting and all of that, if he can be a 38 to 42% 3-point shooter and maybe take 2 attempts a game instead of 1 attempt per game, now he becomes even more valuable when you combine that to his defense. And it's not like he has to take something that he struggled with and get better. He's just got to almost have more confidence in something that he's already good at, if that makes sense.
Jared, what you're talking about is he needs to be able to stretch the floor. If he's not looking to take shots and just be a passer and hold a position on offense, then the team can really set their defense to play 5-on-4 against Romeo, against some other teams, because they're just not going to close out because basically if you don't shoot, you're guarding yourself. And so, 40% from 3 is okay is really good for a guy like McRoberts. But if he is an offensive threat and not a double-digit threat, but just a threat that you can't leave him alone and you must know where he is, that stretches the floor and spreads the defense and allows the Morgans, the Romeos, the Devontae Greens more room to operate. And just by stretching the floor and being a threat, he helps the offense, even if the ball does not go in the basket. And we talk all the time about we need to improve our shooting, improve our offense out past the 3-point line at every level of play. Why? To stretch the defense and make it easier to attack north and south.
And, sticking with offense, you look at some of his weaknesses offensively, and there are obviously a lot of them. I think, the biggest one is going on what you just said. He's too often not a threat. He only used 8.4% of possessions last year, which is extremely low. He only took 7.3% of the shots when he was on the floor. Again, extremely low, to the point where people didn't even have to guard him because he wouldn't look at the basket. I think, some other weaknesses, he doesn't really create for others, in terms of assists. He doesn't get a lot of assists and is a little bit too loose with the basketball for a guy who's not creating. His turnover rate of 20.6%, you'd like to see him bring that down a little bit just so that, he's protecting possessions a little bit more. I felt like a few times last year, he just got a little bit kind of frantic, a little bit jumpy with the ball in his hands, and it led to some bad passes. Wasn't good statistically in pick and rolls, not a driver. He wasn't in those situations very often, and I don't think he'll be asked to do that here. So, he's really on a team that can help to minimize the impact of his weaknesses on offense. And if he can just step up and make more shots like that, Andy, it'll really help accentuate, what he can bring to the table offensively.
Yeah, I think, this team is pretty well positioned to let him play to his strengths, and that is ideally, as you said, small sample size, so take it for what it's worth. But let's assume he can maintain a reasonably high rate of making 3-point shots in spot up situations, and being a guy who just is opportunistic and cuts off the ball. But the second thing I said there again ties back to the basketball IQ. There's no reason to believe that he can't make smart, timely cuts and take advantage of the fact that defenses are going to be paying attention a lot more to other guys than they are to him. So there's no reason to believe that he's going to be put in the situations that really accentuate his weaknesses in any way. And, we've kind of talked about this somewhat jokingly, but, I've talked about the senior year Dane Fife. I mean, to go back and look at what he did in his senior year, he only used 14% of possessions. But he took, 240 shots from the floor between twos and threes. Now that is not going to happen with Zach, I don't think. So there's, it's not going to swing quite to that level, but, Fife was, a 47% 3-point shooter on 140 attempts that year.
Wow.
And his main role was defensive, steal rate of 2.7%. As you look back. And so that was really what he was asked to do. He wasn't a guy who was creating off the dribble and doing those kinds of things. He was really making things work with his defense. So maybe it's senior year Dane Fife light, but I think that's the kind of role, performance thing like that. I mean, if you told me that McRoberts doubled the number of threes that he took and made 40% of them, I think you'd feel pretty good about what he would provide, even if he didn't do much of anything else above and beyond what he already has done. So he's not a guy who you're going to see that, possessions used number get up at all into the, 15 to 20% range. But I think he can be really efficient because of that, because he's, really only shooting the ball in scenarios that accentuate the things that he does well.
I mean, Dane Fife was a 5-star recruit who was a huge contributor on a team that made it to the national championship game. If Zach McRoberts can be Dane Fife light as a senior, that would be quite the achievement for Zach. So that would be pretty awesome. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and the coach, Brian Tonsoni. Coach, go.
But on the other hand, if some of the young guys come in and can hit a three and then drive and can make more passes and assist and does not turn the ball over at those levels, then all of a sudden now Indiana has 5 threats, major threats on 2 or 3 different offensive things. That's why the summer is important for McRoberts as well, to work on his game, to be better than what he was, so that the basketball, I don't think anyone's better than he is basketball IQ. But some of those stats that you said, Jared, are a little bit concerning, because if all he is a 3, there's a way to defend that too. You just run at him and try to run him off the 3-point line if he becomes a threat from the 3-point line, and hope that he turns it over or doesn't hit the open man. So, we all like McRoberts, but there is some liabilities there with him on the floor offensively that he needs to get better in order to maintain those minutes.
But let's also be real. We've spent a lot of time talking about his offense because that's what Zach McRoberts needs to improve on. But he will play because of his defense, because his coach values defense, and because Zach McRoberts is an elite defender. Like, it's not just that Zach McRoberts hustles and tries hard out there. When you watch him with the eye test and look at some of the matchups that he takes on, and then when you look at the numbers, it all matches up. So let me give you a few numbers, Coach, and you tell me if this kind of matches, what your eye test tells you when you're watching Zach McRoberts on defense. We talked about the steal rate. It was best in the Big Ten. Active hands, active feet, active eyes helped lead to that. He had 173 possessions last season where he guarded the man who ended the possession with either a shot or a turnover. Right? That is not a small sample size. That's a lot of possessions. He allowed less than 0.7 points per possession. That was in the 91st percentile in the country. And that was playing some pretty good competition and taking on some pretty big individual matchups. He rated as excellent in the top 83rd percentile or good in the top 56th percentile in all overall areas of defense. So whether it's spot up, guarding pick and rolls, ISOs, off screens, post ups. So he doesn't have a glaring weakness defensively, except for maybe one, which I'll get to in a minute. But he also, on a team that gave up so many open threes and didn't seem like it could recover well to shooters, he defended catch and shoot opportunities really well. In 52 attempts, only 15 makes, which was in the 82nd percentile. So did all of those things really well. When you look at the one thing inside the numbers that he struggled with, and I think this makes some intuitive sense, is he can struggle at times containing dribblers. So in end of shot clock situations, which is, kind of some one-on-one stuff, in 23 possessions, he gave up 20 points. 28th percentile. And all of these are somewhat small sample sizes, but still telling, I think. Guarding jumpers off the dribble, in 38 possessions, he gave up 35 points. That was in the 30th percentile. Guarding drives to his right, in 12 possessions, gave up 11 points, 27th percentile. So, again, smaller sample sizes, but you kind of see the one weakness is when it's almost like when he gets matched up just one-on-one athletic ability against athletic ability, he can struggle. But in team defense situations that call for awareness, knowing where to be, being able to recover, not doing the fake hustle, as you would call it, coach, but actually recovering well. He does all of those things at an elite level. And that is why he is going to play this year, because even if those other guys provide the offense that you're talking about, coach, the defense that Zach is going to be able to provide and help stabilize on a young team is what I think is going to be most important.
Yeah, and Archie Miller said that it takes 2 or 3 years to really get his pack defense in. And when you have a high basketball IQ guy like McRoberts, with all of those stats on the positive side, were simply because he's in the right position. And it takes a mind and it takes a heart to play defense. It doesn't take a lot of skill to play defense. You have to have a desire. And McRoberts has a desire. And I think that's why we all really, really, really enjoy him. When you talk about the weaknesses, though, good coaches will isolate him and they'll work the ball around and they'll, find a way to get him in one-on-one. But so we could go through every player and find their weaknesses, and a good coach is going to attack their weaknesses. But yeah, McRoberts is a guy you can depend on defensively. And a lot of times coaches will put their, the fifth best offensive player, if he's a solid defensive player, will always have a place to play, because you got to stop people to win as well as score points.
Andy, any final thoughts on Zach here before we wrap up? I mean, I think it seems pretty clear that we're all pretty, pro Zach, and hopefully we didn't overdo it with the praise. Hopefully this was a realistic look at what he can bring, both on the positive side and what he needs to improve on. But I think any way you slice it, when you look forward to this season, he is going to be an important part of the rotation, and it just remains to be seen if that's playing 60% of minutes or maybe 40% of minutes, or somewhere in between. But he's going to be a guy who plays a good amount.
Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway for me and I think it'll be interesting to watch how that shifts over the course of the season, like we talked about a little bit. I think early on, it probably ends up more on the 60% side of what you said, and maybe that diminishes a little bit as other guys get more comfortable and get their feet wet. But by the same token, if he comes out and plays well and gives you a little bit more offensively and the same kind of defensive production and awareness that you just described statistically, it's really hard to see that dropping off. And perhaps as younger guys take minutes, they're going to come at the expense of somebody else and not him. But yeah, I mean, I find it really hard to believe that at least initially his minutes would drop off substantially unless for whatever reason he's just not showing the same kind of effort that he did before. But again, I go back to he's shown the kind of effort in practice situations and in games and the kind of awareness and just general giving your team a better chance to win for two different guys over the last 2 years that it feels like a stretch to really make. It feels like a much bigger stretch to make the assumption that he's not going to be able to do that and earn those minutes than it does to say, the other side of that argument.
I felt like we had an amazing conversation on all levels.
All righty. Coming up in our final segment, we are going to answer your questions. A couple of good ones submitted. One of the questions is a great one about which Big Ten player who isn't a preseason all-league candidate that we would want to add to IU's roster. So really required kind of digging deep in the other rosters. That and a couple of other interesting questions coming up next. Stick with us on the Assembly Call. All right. This is a note that will be interesting to only me, but the timing of that third segment was exactly the same as the timing of the first segment. Hard to do. Pretty sure that's the only time that's ever happened. So
what can we say?
Andy, do you recognize that music?
Yeah. Is that what for the bracketology thing?
Yeah.
I thought that sounded familiar.
Yeah, I did some more. I don't know if I talked about this last week, but I did some more research on music licensing.
Don't incriminate anyone while we're here.
No, I know. Just hat tip to Valerie. I don't. I mean, it's kind of a gray area. And so I think what we could do for the radio show, I don't think it's like the same licenses don't apply for the podcast and the live broadcast. So we can do that while the show is on the radio, but we would have to like edit in different music and, we don't have time to do that. So I figured in the meantime, it's safer to get music that we have licenses for, and we'll just move forward from there. So that's why no fun Michael Jackson or any of those songs this week. It was fun for a few weeks.
What's the basic rule?
Well, the basic there isn't really a basic rule. Is the basic rule. There are different, there's different copyrights and different licenses that you have to get for, say, a live broadcast, or if it's something that people record and download. So there's like a live presentation right that the copyright owner has, and then also a reproduction right. And technically what we're doing on the podcast is reproducing it because it's being downloaded. So it's not the same copyright that would apply to the radio. So like they probably pay into some kind of service where they can use that because they pay for the live version, but they would have to then have another license to put it on their podcast as the same music. So it's really like, once you actually start digging into it, it's pretty complicated. But it didn't seem actually all that gray. Like it actually seemed like it's not something that we should do for the podcast. So hence why we are not. I'm glad that I dug into that further, and I appreciate Valerie sending me some links and encouraging me to do so. So thank you, Valerie. All right, let me get the quick time. We're at 46:34, Andy. Since you can do this in your head.
5:26.
26.
We have 52 minutes, right?
Yeah, 52 minutes.
I could do it in my head as long as I have to ask every single time how many minutes we have for the entire show.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll probably be able to get through the first question. So we need to be out of here about 4:50. Oh yeah, Coach, you put the one that I was thinking. The other one that I was thinking about.
Well, I have a couple, but now you're making me wonder whether one of them I did not think of originally because I thought they'd probably be in the top 25. So we can talk about this off before we get on. Is it fair to assume that Josh Reeves of Penn State would be on the 25?
I thought about him too. He's too good. He's got to be in the top 25.
What about Xavier Simpson of Michigan?
I thought about him too.
That was a guy I originally thought of, and I don't think he would show up on the other. So that's who I'll go with then.
So we're all guard heavy, right? Did anyone think about another post player?
No. I immediately went to, if you looked at the biggest question for this team, it would be point guard. And I basically just went down the list of point guards in the Big Ten and looked at who's a really good defender that Archie would want at the top of the thing. And that's why Simpson is actually who I thought of first, because I think Reeves, I kind of immediately was like, probably not, but just wanted to see if you guys were on the same page on that. So yeah, Simpson is who I thought of, like could run a team with, comfortable not being the guy that has to score and getting other guys involved like you did with Michigan last year. Yeah. Was on a team and get to the final game. So
that's pretty good. Okay, let's hop in and we'll see if we have time to get to the other questions.
Okay. I did think about Watson too, but he's probably
he can't shoot.
Is he like fringe top? Well, neither can Xavier Simpson, so we can't really use that as a.
I don't think he's top 25. Glenn Watson?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
How did he score last year? No, I don't know. I didn't bother to try to compile a top 25, so my thoughts on it are probably fairly.
I think it's one of those, like, if a name is obvious, like to me, like Josh Reeves is obvious. Glenn Watson's so he probably counts.
Josh Reeves is hard because he didn't score a whole lot, but I think impact wise, I think we would all agree that he probably would be. But
yeah, and he's efficient offensively, even if he doesn't score a ton.
Yeah, Watson he really can't shoot. Holy crap. His 2-point numbers are atrocious.
It's bad.
He took 229 twos and shot 38%. Good God.
That's terrible.
He threw in 117 threes where he shot 29%.
That's bad.
Wow.
That is bad.
At least
Tim Miles, rein him in.
Simpson he shot 56% on twos. Yeah, he shot the same, 29% on threes, but he didn't shoot as many.
Yeah.
And although he's a 52% free throw shooter, so that's not ideal.
No. All right, let's do this last segment. Here we go. You're listening to the Assembly Call. We are wrapping up another week of talking IU basketball. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and the coach Brian Tonsoni. And let's get quickly to your questions, see how many of these we can get through. First question is from East Coast Hoosier. It says, what one player in the Big Ten who you would not expect to be on Inside the Hall's top 25 players list would you add to IU's roster if you could? By the way, I just want to say this is a great question. Like, it's a really smart question because it puts a fun constraint on it, which makes it, kind of extra fun to think about. It makes you consider players that you wouldn't and kind of dig deep on Big Ten rosters. So we talked about this off air, and it sounds like all of us pretty much went to the exact same position first, and we were thinking about this. So Andy, lead us off.
Not to spoil it for anybody, but I think we all immediately went to point guard. I mean, we think there are questions about this team, but I think that's the biggest one to answer. My first thought was Xavier Simpson of Michigan, a really good defender, which I think certainly Archie would value, an on-ball guy at the point of that defense, shot well on 2-pointers, good at getting other guys involved, that had a high assist rate. So kind of the quintessential point guard in terms of, getting other guys their shots before getting his own. Struggled to shoot threes and did not shoot the ball well from the free throw line. So some would say that in that regard, he would fit in very well with the team that we saw from IU last year. But he was one of the first guys that came to mind for me, just because of, I think, the things that he would do well are things that Archie values. And it's at a position that probably needs some stability for IU. And so you take a guy who was able to be the starting point guard in a team that got to the final game.
Yeah, and mine was going to be Glenn Watson from Nebraska, senior point guard, solid assist to turnover ratio, good defender, but a terrible shooter. And I didn't think about Xavier Simpson, so I would defer to you on that one. I think he's a better option than Glenn Watson. Coach, who would your guy be?
Well, when you first sent out this question, I right away went with what players from what programs would I like to have at Indiana? Who do I think are the better coached programs? And so that's right away I went to Michigan, and I would agree with Andy there because I just think that they're very well coached. I looked at Northwestern to see if there was anyone, and I settled with Wisconsin and a guy who was injured but started early last year, and Demetric Trice. I just think Wisconsin plays really solid fundamental basketball, and if he was a starter there, no one really knows about him. He's not going to be on a top 25 list, but he is very talented and fundamental. That program has always been fundamental, and that's something that we've been wanting with our point guard, a little bit better play. So my pick was Demetric Trice from Wisconsin.
All right, so let's squeeze in this last question here from Scott. So he says, I saw a lot of cream, quote unquote, in last year's team on occasion, especially early. And Andy, that's something that we talked about on the postgame show, all the bad habits that needed to be broken. How deep do we think some of those tendencies are with this team? Do we think we will see more of an Archie Miller type of team in his second season, Coach?
I think you'll see it a lot more like an Archie Miller team, not quite totally where it's at yet, but it takes a year to try to change, I will say, the emphasis and the ideas that you want to do when you are a new coach. And so, yes, I agree that there was a lot of leftover play and style, and the year has now washed that away, and hopefully that's for the better.
All right, and we have this question from Eric from Facebook. Predictions for Hoosier Hysteria dunk contest and three-point contest winner. Andy, you want to take a stab at that? We got about 50 seconds.
Oh, boy. I guess 3-point, it would feel like Romeo is the way to go.
I'm taking Finney.
All right. Dunk contest. I don't know. Maybe Forrester, although it's always I feel like it's kind of hard for a tall guy to win that one. So maybe Justin Smith. They talk about how he's a really good practice dunker. I remember they joked last year about how he would do some amazing things in practice, and then they would kind of give him a hard time about not being able to do it in the game. So I guess I'll go with him for the dunk contest.
Yeah, if it's, if fan reaction is going to dictate the dunk contest, then I think it'll be Romeo. But Justin is definitely a solid choice. Coach, who are your early favorites for dunk contest and three-point contest winner?
Watch out for Demezy Anderson in the three-point contest, and Jerome Hunter in the dunk contest. Those are my upset specials.
I'll tell you another guy to watch out for in the three-point contest. Al Durham. Watch out for Al Durham. The guy's in there working hard, and he may want to show these freshmen what's up. So show a little love there to Al Durham. All right, that'll do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording, or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
And wrap. Nice. We got through all 3 questions.
All right. Good deal.
Thank you for being here, everybody. The live audience continues to be incredible for off-season shows deep in the heart of summer. It's pretty great.
What do we have tonight?
I see 41 people watching on YouTube right now, and I know it was higher than that at some point. I mean, you know, we're only a few seasons removed, Andy, from that being the live audience that we would get for like games.
Yeah.
So seeing people here for the off season, that's awesome. That is awesome. Sweet. So who do we have left for the player-by-player analysis? We still have to do Al. We still have to do Duran. We need to do Race Thompson, even though we don't really know much about him. But
yeah,
Ryan can talk about how he saw him and how he's bigger than he thought. He likes that anecdote.
Yeah, I mean, probably Alan Duran are really it.
I think
right?
that's it, right?
We did Devontae, Juwan.
Clifton Moore.
We did Devontae, Juwan, Justin, and yeah.
And McRoberts.
Yeah, we might be able. I mean, might need to think about maybe Clifton and Race. You could combine into one because you're not really going to have numbers on either.
Yeah, I know.
When you think about how we're doing this from a numbers perspective on strengths and weaknesses, that would be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, that would be.
But so maybe we Al or Duran next week, barring something else going on.
Yeah. Yep. Hopefully, actually, and the reason why Ryan wasn't here tonight is he's been feeling a little bit ill, so we just told him to take the week off and focus on the hangover.
Yeah.
Focus.
All
right, I gotta get out of here, folks.
A drug-related suspension. No, it's not.
No,
don't believe what you hear.
No, it is not that.
You don't have to lie to them, Andy.
Andy, did you hear? Do you hear some of the drops that we had from you? This is one of my favorites.
These guys are real life idiots. Yeah, I did. We listened to when we were driving down like a week ago. I guess it'll be 2 weeks ago tomorrow. We listened to the Thursday night from that one, and then we listened to the other one coming back. So it helped pass our time in the car. It was
nice. That's what we aim to do here at the Assembly.
Yeah,
Call.
Jen was really impressed at your at the great pride you've taken in getting all those drops.
Yes,
he was like, he's really into this, isn't he? I was like, yeah. She's like, is he just going back through old things to like how much work is it to find these? And I go, I honestly have no idea. So
it's less than you would think, but more than it should be. That's what I'll say.
Amy said the same thing. He does all that and he has a job.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I was thinking about this though. I don't like. I think for the post game show, like I'm not gonna plan on doing any of that stuff because there's too much to focus on, and post game show is a little bit more like serious. Let's talk basketball. But and let me know what you think because it's all just an experiment. Like if you think that they're poorly timed, if you think that it's distracting from what we're trying to do, I just kind of thought for the weekly Thursday night show, my goal with it anyway is just to provide some little lighter moments. Hopefully, kind of develop some little inside jokes that longtime listeners kind of get because I think that works for when you're trying to build a loyal audience. So, but it's it definitely if you if you don't think it's working or if you think there's better ways to do it, let me know because I'm just kind of trying it out.
No, I think it's fine because it's typically in like resets or other kind of parts of the show where it doesn't make it confusing for people to know who's actually around and talking at a given time. I think if they're like interspersed a lot in the other kind of conversational components of it, it might be confusing for people. But I think the way that they're used now, it's not.
Whatever. It's just so friggin' confusing.
Oh man. Okay. Coach, thanks for stepping up again. Always awesome to have you here.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. We'll do it again next week, as we always do. Thanks everybody for being here live. And
One last thing, Jared. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry you got beat on that draft. Sorry you got beat.
what are you talking about? Sorry, I got beat. I concede nothing. I concede nothing. Look,
He's also not sorry. So I mean, there's really
No,
no
sorry, not sorry.
he's not.
anybody who said the things he said last week is not sorry. He doesn't feel bad for you. So
No.
don't get that
I
wrong.
commend you guys for trying, and I'm glad you had me on for this segment. It's all about winning.
Those are not the sounds of a man who's sorry. That's for sure.
No. Oh man, I love the subtle dig at Ryan.
Why Ryan's new show is called what it is, because he kind of drafted like that, I think. But anyway,
Ouch.
Oh wow, Megan, today is the anniversary of the paperback release of Better Than Advertised. I had forgotten about that. That's awesome.
There you go.
That was a fun book to put together. Now we need another season like that.
Yeah.
No one wanted a book from the last 2 years.
You live. Yeah.
We're like, we'll do one of these after every season, and then the next 2 seasons came, and it's like, no.
Or everybody just go watch Jaws. It'll be pretty much as uplifting. So it's fine.
here's a quick fun story. So, my youngest son's a manager at Indiana State, and they got an Iowa transfer. Christian Williams is in, and he was talking about how upset he was that Indiana beat them for the Big Ten or he didn't get a Big Ten championship, whatever IU won in 2016. And my youngest son says, well, we have a Big Ten championship ring in our house because Brandon was the manager that year. And so he asked for a picture of the Big Ten championship ring to show this Iowa transfer. So there's still some hope for my youngest son being a Indiana State guy, that he still likes Indiana sports. But there's a little trash talk in the family, I guess. It happens in the family. But they were reliving 2016 year just this summer at the Indiana State basketball camp.
Man,
Nice.
That game that Indiana won at Iowa, that game was so much fun. When Yogi hit that shot. Beautiful.
I do admit to getting that ring box and open it and just sitting in the room silently with it for minutes and then closing it and putting it back into safety. It's kind of nice.
It is nice. That would be cool to have around, to just be able to go look at.
The tuition we paid was worth it, is what I told my wife.
When we see a Sweet 16 ring show up on the IU Artifacts Twitter feed, we're gonna know where it came from. All right, gents.
Have a good night, everyone.
Yep.
All right.
We'll see y'all next week.
Everybody. All right. We'll see you guys.